Y2K was 20 years ago. What are your best Y2K stories? I lived overseas and was watching the news with family and friends on the Armed Forces Network. The newscast did the countdown and then at 1 they cut the feed and it went to static. There were several gasps and then about 5 seconds later the feed came back and the newscast shouted, "Just kidding. Happy New Year." I thought it was pretty clever. My favorite thing was cemetery headstones that were not Y2K compliant. People had headstones made before they died with the 19 pre-engraved, planning on filling in the next 2 digits when the time came. Oops, they kept living. I worked in it at one of the Dow Industrial Company's headquarters, and I spent a high percentage of 1999 doing Y2K tests on every single computer, server, printer, fax machine, and, I'm pretty sure, coffee maker. No problems, and no signs of problems. That year was a waste of my life. I was managing the ad department in a state agency and were under enormous pressure to prevent any Y2K problems. On New York Day I went to work before dawn and tested everything before the exec director arrived. Relieved that everything was working okay, we went to IHOP for a celebratory breakfast. The IHOP bill was date/timed stamp 32/1999. In October, my dad finished off the spam he purchased for Y2K. He bought 12 cases of it because it was super cheap leading up to Y2K and he just really enjoys spam. I'm honestly impressed at the dedication of someone to eat 288 cans of spam over 20 years. I got up at 3 AM to check if the world had ended. It had not, so I went back to bed. Not really a good story, or a story, really. But I used to read the hip-hop magazine, The Source, and I remember they had an issue on Y2G, as they called it, yet to grand, I guess. It was pretty cringy. It had Jay-Z in some weird, metallic, futuristic clothing and some backup dancers with spiky hair on the cover. I've been told that my brothers and I came down with chickenpox, so my parents were stuck at home for Y2K. Better luck next millennium, I guess. Lost my virginity on the 31st of December 1999. That was 20 years ago. I was the liaison between sales and production for a company that made automatic transfer switches in October 1999. It was my job to make sure production was shipping them out on time. They wouldn't give me a computer, so I had to keep track of everything on paper and fax. I quit in November of 1999. I was 10 years old and spent the night at my grandparents' house. My grandparents had stockpiled food just in case, but weren't tripping much beyond that. Once it hit midnight, I watched as nothing happened to my digital watch. Then we looked outside, saw our normal fireworks, and on TV everyone at the ball drop was like, "Okay, cool. So we good." Spent the holidays with my Oma and Opa up north. Woke up January 1st 2000 with the house shaking, and for a split second my 9-year-old mind thought everyone who had been freaking out about the new millennium were right. Ended up just being the Kapora earthquake. I drank 2 bottles of red wine, got a nosebleed. I was working when fiberglass at the time and I used to get them a lot, and was sat on the doorstep vomiting when midnight struck. I went to watch the fireworks in London. Climbed a tree to watch, and didn't get arrested. I didn't see any trouble all night. Best behaved crowd ever. Had to walk home cause all the tube stations were closed. Alberta, Canada. My dad worked for the provincial government and was assigned to Alberta Environment's Y2K Rapid Response Team. If the millennium bug caused anything in the oil fields to go boom, dad would have to supervise cleanup efforts. January 1st, 2000. At around 1:30 AM, dad got the call. "Yeah, everything's fine. Rapid response team is being disbanded. Go back to bed and enjoy your day off." In my special Y2K closet I still have 2 MREs. I ate one and it was terrible. 2 paper towels, 3 toilet paper, 4 paper plates, 5 plasticware, 6 several cans of Sterno, 7 and a hand crank powered AM radio. FYI, 1 million cranks yields about 2 minutes of radio. Neighborhood kid hit some kind of transformer with a mortar shell, knocked out the power on our block and a few others about 15 minutes after midnight. I was 12 and thought it was funny. I guess I never truly believed society could crumble from some ones and zeros. However, a cowlook of guests who were my parents started wailing like Armageddon had just began. It WSS funny. We are now closer to 2038, which will be when the real computer date fun will happen. I was in 8th grade, and I remember my friend's mom was dating someone who fully believed civilization would stop. We went with her to the grocery store to buy $500 worth of canned food and helped her stack the cans next to his drums of water in the basement. When nothing happened at New Year's, I laughed thinking about all the canned corn they would have to eat with dinner for the next year. Got paid extra to shut down the factory and prepare for imminent disaster. Had a great laugh when overall nothing happened. I watched a rather large client's database change from 1999 to 2000 without a problem. I made it. I was 10 at the time. I cried a little and hugged my family's microwave goodbye. Not my story, but a good friend of mine at the time had a mother who was, well, anyway, she wasn't allowed out of the house. She told me her mom made them kneel in the living room for hours to pray without ceasing. They had a stockpile of food and water, and they were able to talk her mom out of barricading all the doors and windows, but her mom made them pray until about 12:45, when she didn't die, claimed that they and their prayers had stopped Y2K. My mom was pregnant with my brother at the time and really wanted to have him before Y2K just in case all electronics stopped working, so she forced him out 2 days before lol. He is technically a 90s baby by barely 2 days. I was working as a 911 operator in Canada. Its staff and the mayor were all wringing their hands about midnight. At the stroke of midnight, numerous panicky calls about an apartment building on fire came in. I tried to dispatch that town's fire trucks and came up totally empty. It was a blank screen. So we did it the old-fashioned way and made phone calls. Turns out the glitch was unrelated to Y2K, but was a human error. I was night shift for it. Watched the one system we deliberately hadn't patched as it was being phased out. Waited to see it crash. We knew it wasn't compliant. Nothing. Fuck all. It finally failed in February. We never bothered to look at what happened, that I know of. I was at my parents' friend's house and snuck away at midnight and flipped the main breaker to the house at midnight. Everyone thought it was real until they started looking out the windows to see if the neighbors had power. Spent the New Year's Eve with the family at the TV station my dad worked at, in case he had to deal with an issue. There were no issues. I wrote a series of short sci-fi stories about the Y2K bug being an actual physical insect. It had element of cyberpunk and time travel, but was mostly just a bunch of crap. I went to a street party with my then boyfriend. He wandered off, and I ended up trapped in a conversation with an elderly man who asked me if I'd ever let a dog lick my labia. He gave me a few reasons why I should try it, and I had no idea how to get away or say no in another way without being violent. That's most of what I remember from Y2K, so thank you old man. Me and my brothers thought there would be an immediate catastrophe like a blackout or an explosion or some shit. We went up onto a hill to watch the madness unfold, and we saw nothing. Lots of fireworks though. I went and saw Patch Adams speak after the Robin Williams movie. He was convinced we're all about to die. Talked about an oil rig that failed a Y2K test and burst into flames and sunk in the ocean. I have no idea if that is at all accurate. I started watching Y2K updates on cable starting with Sydney, Australia, waiting for the worst. It was anticlimactic. My dad worked for a business dealing with the Y2K drama. He was given a Y ticket. It's a duffel bag with survival stuff and other things in it. Still have it. I just remember my brothers and I tried really hard to be the first ones to burp/fart in the new millennium. At least in our time zone. Close bracket. Sitting in my friend's basement testing batteries with our tongues as his dad ran around like a madman doing last minute preparations. I wasn't allowed back over there once my parents knew what happened. My parents bought enough non-perishable food for a year and 10 80-gallon drums of water to get us through the apocalypse, and then they returned it to Costco on January 2nd lol. So I was delivering pizza for this little place called Panux's, and of course I was working New Year's Eve. I had a delivery to some lab or something. I would not be born until 27 days later. I was playing Pokemon Blue on an emulator on my 386 computer. Nothing happened. I looked at my system time and it reset to 1980. Every file on the computer worked, but if I tried to access a new file, say from a disk, of a newer date, the computer just said this file doesn't exist. So basically my old ass computer had a bit of a temporal mindfuck.